As we do on the program, Sean, we like to go around the country, get different points of view about what's happening regionally in races. So, a real pleasure to welcome onto the program Kirk LaPointe. He is former mayoralty candidate in the city of Vancouver, a good friend of the Hub, a regular contributor. I'm sure we all have read and enjoyed Kirk's writing about BC, Vancouver, all the crazy going on and politics there. Kirk at Tidewater. Thanks for coming on. Well, Kirk, let's dig into the race in BC. What are you seeing? You're our eyes and ears out there. Any shifts? Any surprises? Give us your sense of the first couple weeks of this campaign.
Yeah, first of all, I think we're seeing pretty well in other parts of the country, the NDP vote is in a little bit of a desperate strait. And so what you're seeing are a lot of races that had been taken by the Conservatives are now swinging back a little bit toward the Liberals. Liberals were at 15 seats out of the 42 here in 2021. I think the expectation now is that they're in line for 20, maybe 21 seats. That would probably mean carving out mostly out of the NDP. And you're starting to see a little bit of a taste of perhaps having the opportunity to make some inroads by the Liberals, on Vancouver Island, which has always been kind of NDP territory, and you're seeing a bit of that. Um, and I think some of the tone has been set, uh, not just by the departure of Justin Trudeau, but I think the reaction to the threat of tariffs here made for some fairly quick reorganization of voter support. A lot more fear-based uh, reaction, I think, to Trump's tariff threat, um, ostensibly because of the NDP premier. And David Eby, threw up huge alarms. I mean, he created a piece of legislation that, would have made Chicken Little wince. It was so draconian that I mean, dial it back. So the worst of it, he's actually had to rescind very quickly. But I think it set the tone, and he declared war. Or felt like the war had been declared on BC, even without understanding what was going to go on. And I think that, I think inadvertently, I think he hurt his federal party
Kirk,
considerably.
Kirk, one of the issues that has played out in other parts of the country is the relationship to, or lack of relationship with, the federal Conservative Party and its provincial cousins. We
Yeah.
have, for the first time in a long time, a significant provincial Conservative Party in British Columbia. How has it played into this election campaign? What has been the relationship between the Poilievre-led federal party and the provincial party in BC?
Well, because we had such a recent election, Sean, you could easily see a continuum here, which has been distance, a great deal of distance, surprisingly.
Hmm.
Pierre Poilievre never came in during the election campaign and said, I like this guy, John Rustad. I think he's going to be good. I think, you can always speculate on exactly why, but I think there was a sense that because John Rustad had many of the same policies of Pierre Poilievre, didn't really want to see necessarily them all test driven for a year before he got to run for federal office. And I think he just thought, let's cool it and not get involved. And there isn't really a grand relationship here.
Hmm.
Yeah, each element loans people to the other during the campaign. You've got some provincial MLAs out there doing a little bit of work, and certainly their staff's doing a little bit of work for the federal Conservatives here. But it's also the same with the NDP, even though EB did endorse Jagmeet Singh last week, which was again a bit surprising. He met Mark Carney yesterday to talk
Yes.
about softwood lumber and things, and Carney's going to talk about softwood lumber later today at an event here in Vancouver. But I think that mostly, the popularity of these provincial parties, whether it's in Ontario with Doug Ford or Manitoba with Wob Canoe, or even or in British Columbia with David Eby, just is not translating at all into the federal situation, and it's a bit unusual. Yeah.
What does BC want in this election, Kirk? You know, we're sensing out of Alberta a pretty strong view as to a wish list, right? Pipelines, energy out, federal government, the heck off our provincial prerogatives. Does the electorate in BC have a kind of sense of a wish list that it's communicating in this election?
Well, there are two clear cohorts in British Columbian politics. Rudyard, there's the one that I probably have more of a sense of here in the greater Vancouver area, which is much more, it's much more urbanly tilted. So it's worried about housing, it's worried about those kinds of cost of living issues. But you drive a half hour out of town and the complexion entirely changes. And that's where people are wondering why are we sitting on our resources? Why are we doing things like shipping raw logs out of the country all the time when our sawmills aren't activated? What is it about us that just keeps being, the people that are exporting all of our opportunities? And so I think what people have been looking for is a prime minister who says, I've got a resource plan. I'm going to be conscious because I know that there's a big environmental advocacy out here, but I'm going to be conscious about this as I move forward. I'm going to basically create a whack of jobs in this province on the things that are in the ground and that are there for the taking for us. So I think that's been where problems have ensued for leaders is that they'll kind of say and do one thing inside Greater Vancouver, but have to kind of go and say something else in other parts of the province, and so it muddies it. And I think leaders have had a hard time trying to wear both hats.
Yeah, well said. Let me ask a question about you that gets at something even deeper, or maybe a bit about political identity. As you know, Kirk, in recent days, there's been a lot of discussion of Western alienation, even musings about possible Alberta succession. How does British Columbia feel about being lumped in with the West, broadly defined? To what extent do we need to draw distinctions between the kind of center of gravity of the politics between British Columbia and the Prairie West? And to what extent do some of the feelings of alienation or agitation in Alberta and Saskatchewan also find expression in British Columbia?
Well, I'll give you some props here. I mean, there are a lot of central Canadian media that barely pay any attention to British Columbia. It's staggering. And having worked in both centers, I can understand why we're three time zones apart, and not very much seems to somehow be in the way of a dialogue with all of these things. But the West and the far West here really thinks that it has something to offer the country. That a lot of trends in our country did start out here, and we don't feel particularly included. And I know that Justin Trudeau tried to do that, but it didn't take very long for people to for the shine to wear off on that one, and got to the point where people didn't really welcome him up here that much. However, people like Stephen Harper were very clear about the West is in, but I think when he said the West is in, I think he meant more Alberta than British Columbia, and I think people are looking for a prime minister that is actually going to pay close attention to the duality of the province, the urban versus rural divide that takes place here, but each offer very strong elements that the country could use. And I think until we get that, we're going to feel like over the mountains, there's a whole other world. And because that's how we think we're thought of.
Yeah. Kirk, I just want to end by tapping, because we love our contributors at the Hub, their vast kind of experience and different things they've done in their life. You've had a storied career in Canadian broadcasting, the news media, senior roles at CTV, CBC, including as CBC's ombudsman. What was your sense of what's happening in the election around discussion, debate about the CBC? We had thought maybe that it would be a big part of this election because of Pierre Poilievre's earlier statements about abolishing the English language services. We've now seen Mark Carney come out with I could only characterize as a very kind of ancien set of policy suggestions for the public broadcaster, really the status quo kind of plus the status quo. What's your sense of it all? Are you surprised at all at how discussion and debate around the CBC has proceeded in the election?
No, I would have been expecting the CBC to be an issue if the Conservatives were still 20 points ahead. And then I think we'd be having a really robust debate. But I think as the polls tightened on Pierre Poilievre, that became less and less of a talking point that was worthwhile. It was basically handing the Liberals an opportunity to have a discussion about something that the Conservatives realized, they weren't going to necessarily pick up more votes on. If anything, it risked some things for them. I do believe that the CBC can be fixed, but I also think it's a little bit like our downtown east side. It's a generation away of being fixed, and so I can understand the frustration that takes place. I think the CBC did a marvelous job at creating a diverse depiction and presentation on its airwaves. But what it didn't do was along the way pick up a diverse perspective, and I think that I think it's corroding the credibility of it with not just people who are conservatives, but those of us that really want a range of views to be heard on a national broadcaster. The story selection, the themes that are pursued, the repetitiveness that goes into that, and the real lack of range is really troubling, I think, as a journalistic organization, and especially for something that purports to be reflective of its people, as opposed to a positioning statement that a lot of private media would make. And I've been part of those. But I think when you're a national broadcaster, you have an obligation to try to create that broad range, and I think the CBC has missed that mark considerably. We'll see if we get that, but at the moment, it's still a little distressing.
Yeah. So Kirk, what's the next column our Hub readers can expect from you? What are you working on?
Well, guys, I'm going to be doing a piece on who's going to win the Stanley Cup this
Here,
year.
here. Now we're on to the really important questions.
1993, and here we are. Yeah. Man, we are a long way away from a Stanley Cup contender. I think it would be a good thing, though, for the country.
Yes.
Get the cup back this year.
Just
and keep it for 25, 30 years.
Yeah. Well, Kirk is our sports fanatic at the Hub, and we love his writing on that too. So, Kirk, thank you for coming on the program, and we'll let you get on with the rest of your morning in British Columbia.
Great to see you guys. Thanks. Thanks for bringing me on.